and welcome to Blyth. My name is Julie Sawchuk, and together with the Huron County Accessibility Advisory Committee, we are going to be touring through our village to have a look at what accessibility means from a different perspective. Going to introduce you to some of those committee members. We're also touring with some of the planners from the county and some of the chief building officials from around Huron as well. When we're inside the public spaces that are owned by the municipality, whether they're arenas or county buildings, we are under the rules that are in the Ontario Building Code. And so we look to those as the minimum standards for accessibility guidelines. And there's always things that need to be improved within those facilities so that we look at things from the perspective of best practices. As an example, right here on the wall behind me, you can see the signs, but you can also see if you squint your eyes that they're actually not very visible because there's not a lot of color contrast between the sign and the wall itself. So somebody with vision loss, for example, wouldn't be able to necessarily see the information that is provided there. So we're looking at things beyond just what a wheelchair user would use in terms of accessibility features. We can look at bathrooms, we can look at benches, access to things like ice surfaces, change rooms, all the things that go along with that. And this is just one example of an inside space. There's always the libraries that we are going to look at. We'll look at a little bit of our library here today as well. We're going to head outside and talk about parking and the campground. So outside the arena here, we've got lots of parking and 2 designated accessible parking spaces here. They've got paint on the surface, and there's signs on the wall, and there's a transfer aisle in between, which is great for somebody who's using a mobility device because it gives them space to get that device in and out of their car. I'd love to see that space a little bit wider. It should be 2 meters wide, not just 1 meter wide. But the funny thing about this setup is the parking's over here, but the accessible entrance is way over here. To get that door to open. So just trying to shorten the travel distance for people is sort of the ideal way to go. We're going to go and have a look at the campground. So we're here at the Blyth Campground, and it's lovely and flat and pretty firm surfaces on the roads that go between the campsites. The new Blyth Festival Theatre is down the hill back there, and they have some accessible parking down there, which makes it easier for people to get to. The thing I wanted to point out here are the picnic tables and how beautiful they are, but there are not one that has any sort of accessible aspect to it. And the reason why I point that out is because it's a really easy win once we get it into our buying practices to look at accessibility for all of the procurement decisions that we make as counselors or as county staff, making sure that accessibility is taken into consideration every time a purchase has been made, because all these picnic tables need is like a 1-foot extension, and then someone would be able to roll up and have a meal with their family there, everybody together. One of the considerations for outside spaces is connecting old development to new development, and we have a situation here where things could have been done differently, and it would have served better for more people. So I'm not really sure, who is the deciding body in a situation like this, but where we have a newly constructed sidewalk that half meets the old cement and half meets the gravel. Now, my chair is a pretty small wheelchair, so I can actually make that work, but that's certainly not the case for everybody, and it would have just been a nicer path of travel if that were extended whatever, 6 feet. And the same can be said for some more of the sidewalks, and we're going to have a look. Around town. When we're looking at outside spaces that are our public spaces, and we're looking at accessibility, we look to the AODA and the design of public spaces. And sidewalks are a part of those regulations and the rules and the guidelines that we look at for how to make them as accessible as possible. In a situation like this, what we should have is tactile warning indicator surfaces, those little domes that help people who are navigating with a white cane know that they're coming into a hazard like a road, for example. The sidewalk is ending, we need to cross the road. Using the white cane, they detect that by feeling those surfaces. So both here and across the street. And this is kind of like the Shell Silverstein where the sidewalk ends, and this is it. It'd be lovely for the rest of the residents along this street to have sidewalk access. We're going to go over to the park next. So we're here at the Lions Park, which is not a municipal-owned playground, but it is an example of a playground, and there's always things to learn when looking at spaces that are older in their design. And we had a lot of discussion while we were here with the group, and one of the things is simply just the fact that there's no access to the playground equipment from the sidewalk. It's all just grass. Getting even just to sit alongside the bench would be nice to have a little path there. The playground equipment is old and out of date and not accessible for any children or parents that have a mobility device. And there's always ways to make playground equipment more inclusive for children of all abilities. And that is an ongoing conversation in a lot of communities, and I'm sure that will come up here in the near future. So we'll make this quick because there's always trucks coming by. There's a lot of different designs for crosswalk installations. This one is brand new here in Blyth, and I wanted to point out that even when the lights are flashing, it doesn't necessarily tell the person who's waiting here that the cars are stopped. All it says is that the yellow lights are flashing, and the person who is blind is not going to know for sure that cars have stopped. So then this is the tactile warning indicator surface that I was mentioning when we were looking at sidewalks earlier on. So it's a good setup here, but the one that's downtown that has the actual stoplights is better, much safer. So we'll go have a look there. In the downtown here, we have sort of one side of the street where store entries are flush with the sidewalk, and we have another side of the street where that's not the case, and there's at least one step. When redevelopment happened in these spaces, some of those steps were eliminated, and that's where we have this sort of lovely sloping surface. And the owners also installed power door openers in the businesses on most of this side of the street as well. And then there are other businesses that have taken that same idea and created a flush entrance or a very minimal slope like they did at Sweets and Treats. And you can see more about what they did with their business in terms of accessibility if you watch my Sweets and Treats video as well. We're going to go down the street and have a look at the on-street parking. Accessibility and on-street parking are they don't really go hand in hand, so we'll have a look at why that is. So here's another example of a Main Street storefront that eliminated the step when they did the redevelopment, and they built this alcove right into the opening so that the door was recessed and allowed that to ramp up instead of have a step up, and that slope continues right up and into the store as well. And they also have created accessible bathrooms at the back of the coffee shop. Gonna just roll right down to the parking area that's down here. So here we have a great example of accessible parking done really well, because we've got a transfer aisle between two marked accessible parking spaces, and that transfer aisle comes right up and onto the sidewalk, which means you don't have to travel around behind a vehicle and into traffic in a parking lot. And the other thing I wanted to point out here, this is where there's a market set up in the summertime. I want to show you how easy accessible picnic tables are, having one end with an extension on them, and even better would be having extensions on both ends, so two people with mobility devices could sit at the same picnic table. Means that I can get right up and join everybody. So a few years back, there was some redevelopment done with the parking here, and this curb cut was created, but it's right in a parking spot. So if a car is parked here, it's blocking access to that curb cut, and it's not a designated parking spot either. And then just 2 spots up, we've got a spot that's actually marked as accessible, but it means getting out into traffic, which, when you have trucks like that going by, is quite terrifying. So the better way is to have an accessible parking spot that's actually flush, so that you could get out and roll, right up onto the sidewalk, or have the accessible parking that's actually around the corner on a quieter street if you have to have on-street parking, which most places do. It's a challenging thing. There's definitely improvements to be done for on-street accessible parking. This is one of those spaces where county services and municipal infrastructure intersect at the library, right, in most of the municipalities. So we have a building that is owned by the municipality, managed by the municipality, but the facilities that are and the opportunities that are happening here are county run, and we have the conflict too of privately owned spaces where accessibility is out of date and needs to be upgraded. So this example of a privately owned building housing the library, where the owners decided to actually upgrade the accessibility. It's a really great case study of what can be done when everybody sort of works together to make it happen. So you can watch my video about the Blyth Library and see about the renovations that happened to the bathroom and to the entry, and how much more accessible it is for all of the patrons that are using the library services here in Blyth.